Hi there, this is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, and welcome to another double take video. And today's double take is the two Lady Snowblood films by Toshiya Fujita, starring Meiko Kaji from 1973 and 1974. This is the Arrow steelbook of both films. They are available on Criterion. I think it's a Region A Blu-ray in Criterion. That's the inside of the steelbook. And these are films about vengeance. The first one is the superior film, in my opinion, Lady Snowblood. It's an interesting revenge story in the sense that it's one of the few revenge stories where the lead character is a tool of vengeance for someone they've never actually met. Usually revenge films are about somebody whose family members are killed, or children are kidnapped or something like that, and they go out seeking for revenge. But Meiko Kaji's character in this is born in a women's prison as a tool of vengeance from her mother, and she's trained up by a priest in the ways of swordplay and martial arts, and being able to jump out of a rolling barrel, which is obviously very handy. So it's unusual in the sense that she's never actually met the person who she's performing vengeance for. It is actually quite a tragic story, because she's just laser focused on vengeance, and some things happen during the story that actually disappoint her, and you actually feel sorry for her because she hasn't got that cathartic vengeance out. It's about obligation. This film is a huge influence on Kill Bill. Tarantino was very open about that. And if you watch it, you can see why. This is way better than Kill Bill. It's streamlined, something that you'll never use the word streamlined in a Tarantino film. It's shot beautifully. I think one of the things that kind of makes it stand out is the use of different techniques that Fujita uses. He uses drawings, he uses still photography, he uses a traditional Japanese score for the time, but then he also uses a kind of 60s, 70s more funky, soulful score at times. He uses handheld, he uses very stately shots, beautifully framed. He uses locations, he uses artificial backdrops. He even uses a real curtain to come down at the end of a scene, which also increases the theatricality of it, if I can actually say that. So there's really lots of beautiful technique tricks that he uses, but it never becomes overbearing to the story. It's a really simple story. She needs to kill 3 people to get vengeance for her mother, who was wronged. It's actually set in an interesting period. It's kind of late 19th century, early 20th century. Song of Vengeance, the second film, actually is in the 20th century. And it's that interesting period in Japan. It's called the Enlightenment, I believe, where the West was beginning to actually get access to Japan. And you can argue whether that's a good or a bad thing. So in the first film, and more so in the second film, people have guns. So sometimes swords aren't the best weapon, because now people have guns. It goes back to Seven Samurai, in the early days of muskets and long muskets, against the sword, because you don't really need to have much skill to use a gun compared with how to use a sword properly. It's a great performance by Meiko Kaji, who would also star in Stray Cat Rock films and Female Scorpion films. But the first one is kind of laser focused. The second one, which starts with a beautiful scene on the beach, is not as engaging and not as good, I would say. It's still worth having, and it's still certainly worth watching. But Lady Snowblood becomes not a secondary character, but for much of the film she's kind of sidelined. Like I said, this was set in the start of the 20th century, and it's about politics. There is a kind of underground that Lady Snowblood is employed by the government to expose, but then while she's there she actually realises that the government's the ones that are shady. So it's about politics rather than personal vengeance. So it's not as focused on Lady Snowblood's story, really. She's just a part of the story. It's still a good film. It's still watchable, but it's just, I mean, you always have to give it credit for, because so many sequels just essentially repeat the plot from the first film. So they could have contrived 3 more people that wronged Lady Snowblood at some point. So you have to give them kudos for actually trying something different. And while not as successful as the first one, it's still worth having and worth seeing, considering both the Arrow edition and the Criterion edition have both films anyway. But certainly Lady Snowblood, if you're a fan of Kill Bill, and you like looking back at Tarantino's influences, I think you'll be impressed. If you're a fan of Japanese cinema, apart from you've probably already seen Lady Snowblood, but if you haven't, I would highly recommend it. It's just a beautiful film, beautifully made, well acted. I should say the violence in it is similar to baby cart violence. There is lashings and lashings of arterial spray. There's that contains those classic kind of somebody gets hit by a sword, and then you wait a millisecond, and then you get a gusher, which is fantastic. It's a lot of fun. It's beautiful. There's lots of good filmmaking techniques to keep an eye out for. It's a great central performance. Really cool character, even though in the end she's actually a tragic character. Yeah, 2 films starring Meiko Kaji, 2 films directed by Toshiya Fujita from the 70s, and they're Japanese, so what other recommendations could you possibly have? So please let me know in the comments below whether you've seen these films, what you think of them, whether they're better than Kill Bill or not, and hopefully we'll see you again. This is Solitude Rowan saying thanks very much for watching, and farewell.